Asia is a place of great size and diversity. It covers 30% of the Earth's land area and is home to 60% of the world's population. These people speak over 1,000 different languages and self-identify as being of more than 50 distinct ethnicities. It's the birthplace of two major world religions, Buddhism and Hinduism, and it's to credit for the invention of many things that shaped the course of human history, including such essentials as paper, bronze, gunpowder, the printing press, and even the concept of zero. Asia is a place of vast deserts, unimaginably high mountains, and the world's most fertile agricultural land. And throughout recorded human history, it has always boasted the world's largest cities. How do we begin to study a place of such size and diversity? The traditional answer is to look at individual countries or nation states. This makes intuitive sense because we know what a country is. We know, for example, what China is. We know what India is, what Thailand is. But when we think about earlier history and culture, examining individual countries becomes difficult. Borders have always been changing. Countries and empires grow and shrink over time. They sometimes break up and reform. Sometimes they disappear altogether. Countries like Indonesia, Pakistan, and even India itself are utterly modern inventions. They didn't exist just 100 years ago. More important, humans have always had very little respect for national borders. They've moved around with great freedom, always bringing with them their ideas, technologies, and cultures. That means that even today, someone, for example, who lives in northeast China may be a Chinese citizen, but in terms of his language, customs, religion, and maybe even his appearance, he might identify more closely with the cultures of Russia. An Indonesian woman on the island of Borneo might likewise think of herself as culturally Malay or even Chinese. And of course, there are many people who live in India who are culturally Tibetan. In other words, national boundaries are not cultural boundaries. So maybe there's a more productive way to think about Asia beyond countries, a more transnational approach. For us, the answer is to use themes. Thinking in terms of themes helps us organize our knowledge. It also helps us identify transnational phenomena that tie the region together into a coherent whole. These are the 6 core themes that we'll be focusing on. Let's look at each of our themes, starting with climate and topography. Needless to say, the weather, rivers, and mountains don't respect national borders. As you can see from this map, vast swaths of Asia share common climate patterns. Since climate shapes people's relationship with the environment, what they grow, how they work, how they mark their seasons and create their festivals, people who share a climate likely care about many of the same things, even if they're from different cultures or countries. A rice farmer, for example, who lives in northeast China, probably has a lot in common with a rice farmer in northwestern India, even though they live worlds apart. The same can be said for people who live in cities or on the water. Similarities in climate and topography give people shared experiences and values that transcend national identities. Of course, the point is that by looking at climate and topography and landscape, we can cut across cultures and find those things that make societies similar. Things get really interesting when we consider languages across borders. Many of you will be aware that Chinese characters are used in China, Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. That means these cultures share a sort of lingua franca, a linguistic bond indicative of deeply rooted cultural exchange that has lasted for over 2,000 years. Sanskrit, the ancient and the sacred language of India, enjoys a similar profile across South Asia. Not only was Sanskrit used by the god kings who founded the empires based in Angkor and central Java, even today, the influence of Sanskrit can be clearly seen in the written scripts of places like Thailand and Cambodia. Shared languages and scripts bind together large parts of Asia, giving those people a shared linguistic heritage, which is again living evidence of the free movement of people, ideas, and things. Similarities in languages bring up an important point. When we look at the histories and cultures of Asia, it's possible to identify two great cultural streams or spheres. The first is called the Sinosphere, meaning those places deeply influenced by Chinese culture. Sinification comes from a Latin word meaning to become like China. Another major cultural sphere is the product of what is sometimes called Indianization. It signifies those places that took on certain linguistic, religious, and social practices of India. Thinking in terms of these two great cultural spheres is another way of helping us organize our knowledge on the region. Let's get back to our core themes. The third is political legitimacy. Every leader and every government bases their legitimacy on something. Sometimes it's a divine mandate, as was historically the case in China, and sometimes it's claims to divinity itself, as in pre-modern Japan and many parts of Southeast Asia. It's important to pay attention to how leaders at every level of society justify their leadership, from emperors down to village heads, because that justification tends to reveal much about social structures, shared beliefs, and explanations for the nature of the universe. That brings us quite naturally to the theme of religion and philosophy. Here again we can identify several major transnational phenomena. Even without taking this unit, you're probably keenly aware of how universal Buddhism is. Temples, pagodas, and Buddhist communities can be found across the region and indeed across the globe. Historically, Hinduism also enjoyed very broad appeal, and it continues to shape the societies of South and Southeast Asia. Confucianism is another one. As a philosophy, Confucianism had a profound impact on the cultures of China, Mongolia, Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. And needless to say, all these philosophies have been closely related to political legitimacy. Moving to the theme of social structures. The way societies organize themselves and the hierarchies embedded into each are tied to notions of status and power. As we explore different cultures, you'll notice some remarkable patterns. Here are some of the key terms associated with the social hierarchies. If you think carefully about these, you'll notice again that they overlap with ideas of political legitimacy, religion, and philosophy. And finally, we come to material culture and trade. Focusing on the things that people used, the buildings they built, and the technologies that they pioneered gives us great respect for human ingenuity, but it also shows us just how mobile people have been for millennia. Things, technologies, and art almost never belong to a single culture. They're developed and perfected by people who moved fluidly between and among societies, not bound by a single geography or ethnicity or nation state. When we look at material culture, the mixing of intercultural influences and the power of trade are unmistakable. So those are our 6 core themes. We'll come back to these again and again, asking you to organize what you learn about each country and region according to these themes. Doing so should help you make some interesting transcultural comparisons. It should also help you develop an appreciation for how the diverse societies and cultures of Asia are both similar and different.